Hi. So today we're going to talk about the Gospel of John, chapter 9. This one is probably one of the hardest chapters I've gone over so far. This story is specifically about Jesus finding a blind man who was blind from birth, and Jesus heals his sight essentially by rubbing clay on his eyes and telling him to wash in the pool of Siloam or something. This story is only in the Gospel of John, and it's a unique miracle in that it involves Jesus kind of doing an action, uh, namely applying the clay to the man's eyes. Most of his miracles don't involve anything like that, so this one's very, I don't know, it's more of like a tangible physical act or miracle. So for that reason, it's significant. It's significant because it's not necessarily in some of the earliest manuscripts we have of the Gospel of John, but it has been included in the Standard Bible. So I think it's worth going over, and it's definitely different. So I'm excited to get into it with you guys and share with you what I've been able to uncover over the course of the past several days. Studying it intensely, looking at the Hebrew, looking at the Greek. Mainly the Greek in this case. So, okay, that's probably too long of an intro, but it is what it is. So let's roll with it. We'll start by reading the story, and then we'll go through it basically line by line and unpack it. John chapter 9. And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me, while it's day. The night cometh, when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground, and made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way therefore, and washed, and came seeing. The neighbors therefore, and they which before had seen him that he was blind, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He's like him. But he said, I am he. Therefore said they unto him, How were thine eyes opened? He answered and said, A man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. Then said they unto him, Where is he? He said, I know not. They brought to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind. And it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then again the Pharisees also asked him, how he had received his sight. He said unto them, He put clay upon mine eyes, and I washed, and do see. So this is really long, I'm realizing. So let's do it in parts. Okay, so here we're reaching the point where now the Pharisees are beginning to question him. Before we get into that, let's start by just unpacking these first, maybe the first 12 verses, just to break it up a little bit. So we have this man, he's blind from birth. There are a few ways to interpret it. We can think of this story as a story of a person who's reaching enlightenment, or as someone who's just fulfilling a desire, any desire. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to kind of look at it through the lens of this is, again, the story of someone who's fulfilling a desire within themselves. So in that line of thought, being blind would be not having a desire or being blind to a lack that you have or a potential that you have and not even realizing that that potential resides within you. For example, you are poor, but you don't even have the desire to be rich. You're just kind of ignorant to the fact that you are so poor. So this can be, let's look at the blind man as that. So then the disciples, they say, hey, why is this guy blind? Is it his parents? Is it him? Why was he born blind? And Jesus says, well, it's not him that sinned, it's not his parents, it's just so that God can do his work in him. And this is basically saying that, what is it saying? So basically, I think it's saying that we come into this world, or not even that, all the things that we lack, all the limitations that we seemingly have, they're not there to punish us or to punish our parents or anything like that. We have these lacks or these limitations in the world just so that we can learn this process of how to grow, be one with God, create our world, be like God. Pretty straightforward. Verse 4, I must work the works of him that sent me while it's day. The night cometh when no man can work. So the way that I hear this is, sort of our role in the world as when we're in human form, as a man or a woman. That is the kind of canvas for God to paint. So that's when it's day. So while we're in this body, while we're in this 3D, whatever, then God can work. The night comes when no man can work. So when I'm no longer in this body, when you're no longer in this body, there's no more lack or limitation. And so work can't really be done. So Jesus has to work while it's day. And this is further confirmed by verse 5, where it says, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So he doesn't just say, I'm the light of the world, which of course is true on some level, and he says that in other parts of the Bible. But here he kind of qualifies it by saying, as long as I am in the world. It harkens back to this idea that Jesus is in the world, but not of the world. And of course, our bodies are in the world. So as long as our bodies are in the world, then God is the light within us. He's the awareness within us. And it's only while we're in the world and have these sort of limitations or this lack that that light has the contrast to really be seen. Verse 6, and when he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. Okay, so what's going on here? The way that I see it is you can think of the clay as twofold clay, really. On the one hand, it's something that allows the man to negate his physical senses. If you were to put clay over your eyes, you wouldn't be able to see the physical world temporarily. And so in that sense, it kind of would blind you. It would blind you to the immediate facts of the world. But also it's mixed with the spittle. And the spittle here is, you can think of it as desire. A lot of times if you really desire something, it's like drool from your mouth. If you're hungry, you salivate. So spit can be associated with desire. And so that's what's going on here. God is blinding him temporarily to the facts of the world so that he can at least conceive of a better idea and have a desire. Essentially, he's giving him a desire. So, and then he anoints the eyes of the man with the clay, blah, blah, blah. And then verse 7, and Jesus said unto him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed and came seeing. So what does it mean to wash? Normally, I think of water a lot of times as emotion or as a feeling. In this case, I do see it as, God gives the man this desire, and then he says, look, go within and get a taste of what it would feel like to have that desire fulfilled. That's what it means to wash away the clay. The clay, the clay being, again, this sort of like blindness to the facts of the world, the spittle being mixed with it, the desire being mixed with it. Then you kind of wash all that off, and now at least internally you can start to see the fulfillment of the desire. Verse 8, the neighbors therefore, and they which before had seen him that he was blind, said, is not this he that sat and begged? So now we have some people questioning, like, wait a minute, who is this guy? So who are the neighbors? The neighbors, I would say, are our internal senses. So it's not like the senses of the external world. This is like their equivalent inside. So inside, you can imagine seeing something, hearing something, feeling something, whatever. So the neighbors are these internal senses, and they're saying, wait a minute, this doesn't seem to match with the external facts of the world. Is this the same person? It seems like him, right? So when you go into your imagination and you view something from the first person, now you have a duplicate of yourself. You have the external you that's in the external world, and you have the internal you that's engaging in this imaginal act. So there's sort of a duplicate. And this duplicate is, initially, it's questioned by your internal state. And they say, wait a minute, is this the same guy? Is this just someone who looks like him? What is this? Who is this imaginal creature? Is not he that sat and begged? Isn't the same person? And some said it's he, others said it's like him, but it's not him. But he said, I am he. Now, anytime you have a statement like this in the Bible, I am he, well, that's about as significant as it gets. In fact, if you look at the original Greek, the he is added. It's actually not there at all in the original Greek. It is just I am, which makes it even more profound, even more powerful. So there's this internal conflict going on. Look, is this imaginal self the same as the external self? I don't know. But at that moment, you say, I am. Similar to I am that I am, which, in like God said to Moses, at this moment, you are claiming internally that, okay, this imaginal act that you're engaging in, this is me, and this is the reality, and I am that. Okay, verse 10. Therefore said they unto him, how were thine eyes opened? So again, this kind of internal state, the internal senses, they're like, okay, but how are you seeing, right? Where is the source of all of these imaginal things? Where are they coming from? Verse 11, and he answered and said, a man that's called Jesus made clay, anointed my eyes, and said unto me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. So he's trying to describe to the internal state, like, this is the process, this is how I kind of like, this is how I got here. And then they said unto him, where is he? And he said, I know not. So this I know not, I think, is kind of twofold. On the one hand, our pure awareness, or the God within us, can never really be seen. It's always a subjective thing. You can't really objectify it. So in that sense, it can never be known. But also he's saying, I know not, because we're still in the early stages of this story. As we'll see throughout the story, the man's own awareness and his own consciousness does evolve and does develop. So he's still at the stage where he doesn't know who this guy is or where he's from at all. He's still pretty ignorant of what's really going on. Verse 13, then they brought to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind. So now we've already passed the first test. Okay, we went within, we felt the initial feelings of the fulfillment of the desire, and we've recreated a duplicate of what we want to experience in the outside world, inside our imagination. We've passed that first imaginal barrier by claiming that we are that and that the imaginal reality is the real one. And now that we've made it past that first barrier, we're going up against the Pharisees now. And the Pharisees will kind of go through a similar process with them as we just went through with the neighbors. So let's see how we pass that test. So then they brought to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind. And it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then again the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He said unto them, he put clay upon mine eyes, and I washed, and do see. Therefore said some of the Pharisees, this man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, how can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. They say unto the blind man again, what sayest thou of him that he hath opened thine eyes? He said, he is a prophet. Okay, and that's it for the Pharisees. Next, we'll move on to the Jews, but that's the third phase. So for now, let's just look at the Pharisees. The Pharisees, in my interpretation, represent doubt. You can think of it as the reasoning mind, the rational mind. And if you look at the word Pharisee, the Greek or the Hebrew, it literally means to separate. Another way to think of it is to divide. That's what the analytical mind does. And so to me, the Pharisees often represent doubt, division, negation, separation, analytical mind. So anyway, now he's past that first imaginal. He's created the scene with his imaginal senses. Now you have the logical mind starting to question whether or not this is real. So what happens? So it's notable that it's the Sabbath day, and that's kind of the issue that the Pharisees have with them. They don't like that these miracles are always done on the Sabbath day. What is the Sabbath day? So the Sabbath day is the day of rest. It's when you finally rest in the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Of course, the Sabbath day it's Sunday, so a lot of us think of it as the last day of the week, but in some senses it's the first day of the week. It's both. It's when we finally fulfilled the desire within, but it's not fully manifested yet. It's not externalized. So in that sense, it's the last day of the week because the things haven't been externalized, but it has been fulfilled. We're kind of enjoying the fulfillment of the desire, and so in that sense, it's the first day of the week. But the rational mind does not like that you enjoy the fruits before they're externalized. The rational mind says, hey, wait, the facts of the world do not confirm that this is true yet. Why are you celebrating? This is incorrect. It's a sin. So then again, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. Similar to how the neighbors asked, now the Pharisees are asking, how did this come about? So he tells them again, Jesus put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I do see. So I had this desire. I closed my eyes to the external world. I felt this desire. I went within and felt the emotion or the feeling of the fulfilled desire, and now I'm enjoying the fruits of it. Verse 16, therefore said some of the Pharisees, this man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. So again, the rational mind says, hey, this isn't the proper order of things. We need things to be in this normal cause and effect, sort of past to future, and you can't celebrate something before it happens. That doesn't make sense. So they're saying it can't be of God. But others said, how can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. So similar to how the neighbors had a division, some of them were like, hey, is this guy is it the same guy? I don't know. Now we have the Pharisees. There's a division that kind of needs to be reconciled. Their issue is that, like, look, we kind of see that he's enjoying it, right? Like, we can see that he's enjoying the fruits of this fulfillment of this desire. So how can we say that it's wrong, So there's two sides to what the doubting mind is thinking. And then they say unto the blind man again, what sayest thou of him that he hath opened his eyes? So again, just like the neighbors had to go, ultimately they depend on the I am for their final verdict. They're disagreeing among themselves. Ultimately, they have to defer to the self. So they go to the blind man again and say, well, okay, well, what do you say? Who is this guy that healed you? And now the guy says, well, I think Jesus is a prophet. So previously he said to the neighbors, he said, Jesus is, I don't know who he is, basically. I don't know where he's from. Now his awareness or his understanding of how this process works is a little bit better. And so he says he's a prophet. He also says he's a prophet because this is the only way that the rational or logical mind can really understand what is going on. The way that the rational mind can conceptualize it is as a prophet. In other words, it's someone who can foresee the future, who can not, maybe it's not someone who creates the future yet, but it can at least see it and have faith in it. So if you have a desire, you have faith in it, it's kind of like you're seeing the future, and at least from the rational mind, or the mind that's bound within time, past, future, that's how it's going to conceive of the imagination once it's fully understood. So, yeah, he says he's a prophet, and that's enough to satisfy the rational mind. The rational mind says, okay, it's meant to be, and you've kind of claimed it within, so that's enough to reconcile the division among them. So then lastly, we go to the Jews. And we have this whole process one last time before things get externalized. So let's see how it plays out. Verse 18, but the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him that had received his sight. And they asked him, saying, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then doth he now see? His parents answered them and said, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now seeth, we know not. Or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him, he shall speak for himself. Let's stop right there. So we can see a lot of the same pattern here. First, the Jews don't believe. So who are the Jews? I see the Jews here as basically the to put it in the most simple terms, it's basically the law of cause and effect. It's the external world. Or if not the external world proper, then the final gate that opens or closes, determining what eventually becomes externalized or objectified and what doesn't. And that is generally the law of cause and effect, seen from like a material worldview. So the Jews representing the law of cause and effect, or that which is the final stage to materialization, they now need to be convinced. And their issue is, they say, look, what's the origin of this guy? We don't believe that he was blind and received his sight. So not only do they not believe that he didn't receive his sight, or maybe they do. Maybe they're looking at him now and he seems to be enjoying the desire. He seems to be fulfilled in his desire. But now they kind of question, well, was he even blind? Was he ever blind? So they're going to look into the past. They're going to look into, the just past in the most conventional sense of the word, to try and figure out, okay, well, what was the chain of causes that led up to this realization of the desire? And chain of causes in a very material sense. And in order to investigate that, they go and speak to the man's parents, the parents representing, again, the material cause and effect chain. And they asked the parents, saying, is this your son, who you say was born blind? And then how doth he see? And the parents say, well, we know it's our son. We know that he was born blind, but how he now sees, we don't know. And who opened his eyes, we don't know. But he's of age, ask him. So similarly to the other two versions of this, ultimately there's a disagreement, or maybe not even that, but just suffice to say, the final verdict, the final judgment is up to the self, to the I am, and that's who has to be deferred to. So the parents, or the physical world of cause and effect, that chain, it not only can it not claim, it's totally ignorant. So as it professes here, we don't know who opened the eyes. We don't know. We don't know who this guy is. We don't know how he sees now, because the physical world is generally blind in that sense. But it says, hey, look, go to the I am, and who will tell you the truth? Or it's up to him to decide, basically. Okay, so these words spake the parents because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. So here we have, this is a very difficult, one of the most difficult verses in this parable, in my opinion. First off, I believe that what it means to be put out of the synagogue, means to be thrown out of the temple, means to be externalized. So we think of it as kind of like this threat, like, oh no, you're going to be excommunicated from, I don't know, your friends or something. But really in this instance, what it means to be excommunicated from the synagogue is to mean, well, what it means is that something is finally externalized, finally manifested. So the parents, they fear the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. So the material world does not, like I said, this is a hard one. Is it worth trying to dig deeper, or should we move on? That's the question here. For the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ. one thing I want to point out here is that the phrasing here is pretty damn perfect, because it says that the Jews had agreed already if that any man did confess that he was Christ. It doesn't say confess that Jesus was Christ, right? So who is the he that's being referred to and referring to themselves as Christ? It's already pointing to this notion that, like, the blind man on some level is beginning to assert that he himself is one with God. On some level, he is one with God. And simply by enjoying the fact that he now has the fulfillment of this desire, he's somehow starting to equate himself with God, which is just that's one of the many interesting things about this verse. And if you begin to do that, well then, a lot of things follow, right? A sort of awakening would follow. And that's definitely something that could be scary, because it's a death to a certain type of identity that you have. And maybe that's one of the things that's being pointed to here. But another way to think of fear that might make it easier to interpret is if you just think of it as a reverence or as almost an obedience to. So it's not necessarily that they're scared of the Jews, but just that they always abide by what the Jews say. So if the Jews in this case represent cause and effect, and the Jews are what determines what gets externalized, well then the parents can never break those laws, the laws of cause and effect. They can never transcend them in any way. And so they don't really have even the ability to claim something that doesn't agree with the physical senses, which is why they say he's of age, ask him. And I think let's end it there. Let's move on to verse 23. So therefore said his parents, he is of age, ask him. So ultimately we are the final authority on our reality. Verse 24. Then again called they the man that was blind and said unto him, give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. So who is this man? Well, this man is your internal I am, the I am that claims that the desire has already been fulfilled. The external world, which disagrees with that, says, look, it does not coincide with reality, therefore it must be sinning to claim this to be true. And so it says, give God the praise. In this sense, give God the praise, I think means adhere to the external world, adhere to the facts of the world as they are. Because we are talking about their God, the God of Moses, not the God of Jesus. And we'll find out that this is the God of Moses later. Verse 25, he answered and said, whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. So now this guy is basically saying, well, whether or not this internal world, this internal fulfillment of this desire is real or not, I know that I'm experiencing it, and I know that I'm enjoying it. And that's good enough for me. That's true enough for me because it's true subjectively, and I am experiencing it. I cannot deny the truth of my subjective experience. Verse 26, then said they to him again, well, what did he to thee? How opened he thine eyes? And now the man responds differently. He doesn't give the same response that he gave to the neighbors and the Pharisees. With the neighbors and the Pharisees, he spelled out for them, Jesus put clay on my eyes. He told me to go wash. I washed, then I saw. He doesn't do that with the Jews. He doesn't do that with the law of cause and effect. Instead, he says this. He says, I've told you already, and you did not hear. Wherefore would you hear it again? Will you also be his disciples? This is another one of these very, very difficult verses. And I'm not sure that I'm fully capable of unpacking it perfectly. But if we walk through it together, maybe I'll be able to share a few insights. So what does it mean to say that this man has already told the external world the truth? In some sense, he's by claiming your imaginal reality to be the real reality, you are already denying the physical world. You're already denying the material world. And so to give an explanation to the external world is to put yourself in subjection to it once again, and to basically erase all the progress you've already made. And so you can't argue with the external world, because then you're attempting to change something that you've already claimed doesn't exist. If you are sick and want to be healed, and you claim that you're healed, and then subsequently go out into the external world and try and explain why you are no longer sick, well, then you're arguing against a reality. You're creating some sort of resistance. And so you just have to say, you just sort of have to claim it at that level, claim that you already are fulfilled. So here he's basically saying, look, I told you already the explanation. You didn't hear it. Wherefore would you hear it again? Will you also be his disciples? So I really do hear this as basically saying you can't argue with the external world. You simply supersede it. You transcend it by claiming your inner world to be true. And then here they reviled him after he said that. Thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. So they saw him as a villain. They reviled him. They rejected him and said, thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. So here we have them confessing that they are the disciples of the law. What law is that? Well, it could be the law of, it's both laws. On some, it's the law of cause and effect for sure. But as the gatekeepers of what gets externalized, sorry, that's my phone ringing. They also adhere to the law of, you could say the law of attraction, or the law of as within, so without. So they're saying, look, we are the disciples of the law. We uphold the law. But that's also them confessing, quietly or implicitly, that they are not the ones who dictate what's laid upon the law, or they're not the ones who choose what gets created or what doesn't get created. They simply enact the law. They're like the enforcers, basically. So they're saying, look, you're the disciple of the I Am. You imitate the Creator. We're the disciples of Moses. We simply enforce the law. Verse 29. The law being twofold, the law of cause and effect, but also the law of as within, so without. Verse 29, we know that God spake unto Moses. As for this fellow, we know not from whence he is. So they're saying that, look, we know that the law is of God, but we don't know this I am, this sort of like fulfillment of this desire, this awareness where this is. It's a bit too mysterious for us. So the man answered and said unto them, why, herein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened my eyes. So I do hear this as the man being somewhat sarcastic. I don't think it could be him saying it's genuinely marvelous. In a sense it is, but let's hear it as though he's speaking sarcastically first. So he's saying, oh, wow, how incredible. You don't know that from where this guy is, and yet he opened my eyes. and then he basically goes on to say, so why is that sarcastic? Well, we have to read a couple more verses to unpack that. So verse 31, now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshiper of God and doeth his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, was it not heard that any man hath opened the eyes of one that was born blind? So it's better if you hear this instead of now we know, instead if you hear it as you know. Now you know. So he's basically saying, wow, it's incredible you don't know who this guy is, because obviously you know that God doesn't hear sinners. And obviously you know that any man, if he's a worshiper of God, well, God does his will, and God, or that is, whoever does God's will, God hears. So how can you not say it's a man of God, right? So it's a marvelous thing that you can claim that you don't know who this guy is, when all evidence points to the idea that this guy is of God. In fact, since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? This verse is very difficult, so let's not really get into that one just yet. But basically, he's saying, you can think of this as him talking to the external world, like, wow, all things come from the imagination. The way that absolutely everything has been made, that is made, is through this process. And yet you're completely blind to it. How is that even possible? That's so amazing. And then the fact that you deny it even is, on the one hand, it truly is marvelous that the world is set up this way, because it's only through that setup that we could enjoy experiencing things in the physical, for reasons that I won't go into. But it's also kind of like sarcastically marvelous, because it's like, wow, are you really that ignorant that you can't see this is how everything is made? So since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? I think it's better to hear this verse as basically saying everything that is made was made through this one process, for reasons that I won't go into. Verse 33. I don't know if I should just skip over that or if I should try and justify that claim. If you were to look at the original Greek, you would see that there's a lot of liberties taken with this interpretation. And in fact, every interpretation, whether it's the New International Version or the King James Version, they all interpret it in a similar way. But if you look at the original Greek, the order of the words is very, very peculiar. And so it's pointing to something a bit larger than is initially apparent. But since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? So basically it's saying it must be of God. Not only this miracle, but all miracles. Not only this desire being fulfilled, but all desires being fulfilled are from God, from this one process that he himself, the blind man, is now discovering. Verse 33, if this man were not of God, he could do nothing. So there we have a confirmation of what I was saying about verse 32. Verse 34, they answered and said unto him, thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. So what does it mean to be cast out? It means to be ejected. It means to be externalized. It means to be objectified. So at this moment, not only was the desire fulfilled in terms of the feeling, in terms of internally, but now it's reflected on the outside. What did they say immediately prior to that? What does the law of cause and effect say immediately prior to that? Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? So are they saying this with a tone of anger and spite? Are they basically saying, who are you to think that you can teach us? Or are they being genuine and saying, wait, are you actually teaching us something here? Are they really open to being taught? So the material world is always blind, deaf and dumb in some sense. It doesn't have awareness of itself. And the Jews in this parable, they simply are the enforcers of the law. They don't question it. And so they can't be taught. Thou wast altogether born in sin, and dost thou teach us? Well, they can't be taught. And that's, in fact, that's precisely why he doesn't argue with them earlier on when he says, I told you already, you didn't hear. Why would you hear it again? Would you be his disciples? Because they can't be taught. So what do they mean when he says, thou wast altogether born in sin? What does it mean to be born in sin? Is it true that he was born in sin? The blind man was born in sin? What does that mean? Well, the trouble is, I guess the trouble with this line is all desires are born in sin. So what that means is, unless you miss sin, the literal meaning of sin, the literal translation is to miss the mark. It means to have a desire and not have that desire be fulfilled. So unless you can foresee something that you want and you haven't yet claimed it, well then you're not sinning. And if you do have a desire that you haven't fulfilled, well then you are sinning. So of course, in a sense, all desires are born in sin. That's the origin of them. There needs to be this sort of process of like, okay, you see something you want, you don't quite have it yet, so that you can fulfill it. So what the Jews are saying here is true. All desire is born in sin. Why does that justify them casting it out, externalizing the thing? I don't know. Hopefully someone in the comments can elaborate on that one for me. I don't feel totally satisfied with how I've unpacked this one. I feel like it's sufficient to move on, so I'm going to move on. Verse 35, because we've already gone on for long. This is, like I said, this is a really difficult one. This is one of the most difficult ones I've done so far, maybe the single most difficult. So it's going on longer than any of the other ones. For that reason, I'm going to move on to verse 35. If anyone wants to elaborate on verse 34 in the comments, please feel free. Verse 35, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said unto him, Dost thou believe on the Son of God? So Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him. So now the thing is externalized, and awareness encounters it in the external world, and basically says, do thou believe on the Son of God? Do you believe not only that this is real, what you're experiencing in the flesh now, this externalization of the desire, but do you believe also that the true cause of it was this process that we just had went through internally? Verse 36, and the blind man answered, said, Who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? So who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? So he's gone through this process. The man has gone through this process of creating and fulfilling a desire within himself, and it's fully externalized. But he's still saying, well, who is... he still doesn't fully understand who it is that weaved together the whole process, I guess. And Jesus said unto him, Thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. So who is Jesus? Well, it was both the one that he encountered internally, the one that was the origin of the desire, the one that fulfilled the desire within, namely his own inner awareness, and it's he that talks with thee now. In other words, the externalization, the fulfillment of the desire. Jesus is twofold. He's the inner and the outer, and both are the man's own I am. And then the man says, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. Another way of interpreting the word worship, the Greek, is to kiss. but almost like to kiss the feet of someone. But to kiss means to kind of like, in a sense, become one with. So, and he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. So at the moment that you believe that your own I am, internal and external, is in fact one with God, one with the creator of all things, then you sort of do this love act with him by kissing him, worshiping him, but definitely worshiping in a sort of like lower, higher dynamic. Verse 39, and Jesus said, for judgment I am come into this world, and they which see not, and Jesus said, for judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and they which see might be made blind. So this is a famous saying from Jesus, and I think I can shed a lot of light on this one. So what is being said here is that those who don't see can see. This is talking about your inner world, your own inner imagination. Many people go through the world without imagining much, or if they are imagining, they're not aware of what they're imagining. Those are the people that see not. So here he's talking about inner vision. He's talking about opening a man's inner vision so that he might be able to see what he is imagining and control it. And his other purpose is so that they which see might be made blind. So here we're talking about seeing the external world. In order to imagine properly, we have to temporarily shut out the facts of the world and be made blind. So Jesus isn't talking here about groups of people. Okay, a lot of Christians would hear this as like, there's good people in the world, there's bad people in the world. Jesus is kind of like punishing the bad people, helping the good people. No, both of these are within you. We're both sides of this. You are both sides of this. The part of you that doesn't see and that God is awakening or giving sight to is the inner vision, and the part of you that does see and that God makes blind is the part of you that sees the external world. You want to be blind to the external world so that you can see the inner world more clearly and create things consciously finally. Verse 40, and some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words and said unto him, are we blind also? So the Pharisees being the rational mind or the logical mind, the analytical mind, and they would hear this teaching, right? Because the blind man, he's becoming aware on a lot of levels. He's learning a lot. And so now the analytical mind, the rational mind, is trying to conceptualize these teachings and store it as the ego tends to do. And now Jesus, or I am, says to them, to the rational mind, if ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. So if you have a desire, then, and that desire is not fulfilled, then your sin remains. And so in this sense, this is this is another hard one. Yeah, this is honestly the single hardest parable we've dealt with so far. But it seems to me that that this is a sort of transcendent element of the story. The desire has already been fulfilled. It's already been externalized. But we can think of it as the man himself still has a little growing to do. He's not yet completely one with the Father, we could say. So he's still trying to conceptualize all this whole process so that he can grow and then use it more effectively, or use this power more effectively, or whatever. Just know the truth. But he's not quite there yet. And so he's beginning to see the possibility of becoming one with God, but he hasn't yet fully embraced that reality and fulfilled it. So the sin remains. I guess that's all I can say on that one for now. Okay, well, if anyone made it through the whole video, I'm super impressed, because that was probably the longest one. I do think it was worth going through in such depth and such detail, because aside from being one of the hardest ones to unpack, I think it's also one of the the most educational, informative. For those who previously listened to my discussion on the Samaritan woman with the woman in the well, you'll notice a lot of parallels between this story and that one, because similar to that story, we have a repetition of these different processes where the inner man has to encounter some sort of doubt or misunderstanding and overcome it. And initially, the man says, well, Jesus is a prophet. And then later, Jesus reveals himself fully, and the inner man accepts Jesus as the Savior, as one with God. That's exactly what happens, more or less, in the story of the woman in the well. So, okay, well, if you haven't seen that explication of the woman in the well, then feel free to look that up on my channel. It's definitely up there. And thanks for listening. Bye.